What you are about to witness is a fascinating interview with a gentleman called Christopher Spencer, or rather that is his pen name. He has to conceal his real name. In the following interview, Christopher speaks about his 50 plus years in the world of high-level finance, both as a banker and a finance and investment broker. He covers everything from international espionage to covert financial agreements, conmen, murder, war, and more, with a touch of personal flair. Everything you are about to hear is true. Some questions were pre-agreed and scripted to explain specific content in his books. Most are not. You can find details of where to buy his books in the video description below. This is part 13. In your opinion, how has the world of finance changed over the last 50 years? Obviously, you've spoken about you've spoken about that. Yeah. But are there any trends or developments that you find particularly concerning or exciting?
I think concern is very much down to the number of new banks that are being created based on the internet. I mean, it's excellent for people. However, requires a level of oversight by the government of these banks. I mean, the major banks, the 4 or 5 major banks, are kept in control and stable because they are the big ones. But there's been a growth in smaller electronic banks, if you like to call them that, that really do need very careful governance and very careful oversight by government. Otherwise, we could have a misuse of the funds that they take, and indeed a liquidation of one of them, which would unfortunately really be to the detriment of the people that had been put large deposits there. The other trend, which is slightly opposite to what I just said, is that the banks seem to be incapable of properly analysing credit risk and people risk anymore, because they're no longer a people business. They base everything on computer programs, ticking the boxes. And because of that, they're incapable of assessing the real risk of opening an account for, say, a company. I mean, I've heard of cases of people having great difficulty to open a bank account for a company. One particular bank, which I don't mention, has a policy if a new company comes along that it must have just one director. I mean, that is very, very silly, because if something happens to that one director, what then happens to the company? You must have a board of directors of at least 2 people, if not 3 or 4. So the company has stability. The company can draw on the views of 4, 5 experienced people. And if 1 or 2 of them unfortunately have an accident or perhaps die, then you've got a remaining board members who can carry on the business. By insisting on a company just having 1 director to open an account is, quite honestly, financially insane.
Some people argue that obviously the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few extremely wealthy individuals is a threat to democracy. What are your thoughts on that issue, and do you think we need to address it? And if so, how should we?
That's a big question. Yes, I mean, let's face it, politicians love to be in the company of rich people. They like to be on their yachts. They like to be entertained by them. Now, there is some constraint on that. Sometimes that constraint is not exercised so heavily as it should be exercised. I'm sure we can all think of recent examples of that. A former Chancellor of the Exchequer going on a billionaire's yacht in, I think, seas off Greece. A former Prime Minister getting an £800,000 loan from a very rich person. The problem is that in those circumstances, the influence is obviously there. And the influence is there as well in smaller ways. And that trickles down to local politicians, to local councils. There's no doubt in my mind that the UK is, despite what a lot of people believe, a corrupt society. Like every other society on earth is a corrupt society. In other countries, this happens even more so and is even more recognized. What we have to do is have oversight. We have to have regulations and rules so that such events come out. But nevertheless, there are corrupt societies now, and there will always be corrupt societies, because that is how the country actually operates. It has operated, a particular country has operated like that for hundreds of years, and it is extremely difficult to change it. As far as trying to control the effect of richer people are concerned, it is very difficult. You have to think, I think, of oversight again, of transparency, of these activities of these richer people being analysed by brave journalists, analysed by other people, to fundamentally say, yes, look, these people are using their influence in the wrong way, and it is having an effect on ordinary people through the action of government.
You've had the opportunity to interact with high net worth individuals throughout your career, obviously. What do you think of some of the misconceptions that the average person has about the lifestyles and motivations of said people?
Well, I think I would divide high net worth individuals into two types. One is the inherited money, and one is what you might call nouveau riche, although some cases they're not nouveau riche, but the riches have lasted for a couple of generations, shall we say. The inherited money I've generally found to be very pleasant people to deal with. They've obviously been able to go to the fee-paying schools, they've been to the good universities. The majority of them are perfectly capable of talking to ordinary guys and girls, of being really interested in people from, I use the word, the lower classes, if you like. It's not the right word, but I'll say from a different background. They also have a sense of obligation. They feel an obligation because of their position, because of their inherited position, very often, that they should do good works in some way or another. They should support charities. They should build new houses for their local village. And they, I think, are to be admired. And I don't think a lot of people understand that there is this attitude amongst these people. The nouveau riche, as I've said, are different. They have got the elbows. They've come up and dragged themselves up from the lower reaches very often. And that attitude is still very much there. They're hedonistic. They love to enjoy life. And one guy I worked for directly, I saw that very much. And, I ended up in bars with him in London at 2:00 in the morning with lots of very pretty girls around us. He enjoyed life, and he had the money to enjoy life. But is that a way of living? In the end, you have to ask that question. He was also a very unhappy man, a very lonely man. There are, of course, people, and I do admire them, that have made a lot of wealth and then decide in the latter part of their life they're going to give a lot of that wealth away and establish charitable foundations and certain good causes. They're to be admired because they've gone through the transition of being the playboy of the Western world at one stage in their lives to becoming responsible mature adult, if you like, and saying, well, I've earned this money. Now I've got to return something to society for the benefits that I have got from that money and from what society has actually given me, perhaps as a result of my abilities, but now I have to return it.
That's very interesting. I say that about the royal family. I'd say the royalists far outnumber the anti-royalists, shall we say, in this country, in the working class. But what I have come to understand, and I don't think many do, is the actual influence and the results of that benefit our country, that the royal family have. Because obviously we have literally thousands of years of aristocracy and leadership and royalty and all the rest of it. And those people have steered the world in many ways for all time and continue to do so to this day, whereas our royal family were the top of that food chain, or are the top of that food chain to some extent, or near the top. And that affords our country a lot of influence and stability and respect that I don't think other countries have. And that's the result of our royal family. And they are extremely valuable to us as a country for that influence. And I don't think the average person understands that at all, because they don't understand that world. What would you say to that?
I would totally agree with that. I've met in my life many people from different countries. I remember the Frenchman leaning over to me in a lunch, which I was a guest at that lunch. He represented a major French bank in London. He ran the London office of that French bank. We were at a lunch where Margaret Thatcher actually made a speech. And at the end of the lunch, there was a toast, of course, because it was Bastille Day, to the President of the French Republic, which we all stood up and made the toast. And then, of course, there was a toast to Her Majesty the Queen. We had that toast. The Frenchman leant over to me and said, you know, we love your Queen far more than we love the President of France. When you look at the world, the Americans, they absolutely dote on the British royal family. Why is that? Well, I think two reasons. One is that they respect that this family is brought up, and yes, the royal family is rich, but they're very poor compared with some of the Russian oligarchs or the American billionaires. But they're brought up in reasonable comfort, but they're brought up in the spirit of service, and Her late Majesty embodied that. She, I think, when at the age of 21, made a speech saying, you know, my idea is service for this country, and I will always do that, which she then did. People appreciate that. These people are there. They're not there to make any money, unlike some politicians, because they've got sufficient for their means already. They're not there to make an ideological point. They're there to try and do as best as they can for the country. And therefore, as a result of that, monarchy works. But it works in another way as well. And that is because the royal family, and I emphasize the word family, are a symbol of the families of Britain. If you're a family, you see the example of the royal family, be it good or bad, and you say, hey, they're a family too. And therefore I identify that. And that strengthens the stability of the UK. And also, that can result in the soft power, as it's called, which we can deploy from the UK using the royal family to enhance the position of the UK really throughout the world.